What goes through the mind of a composer when they take a sheet of paper and begin to write a theme for a sonata? How does musical material come to be? Does a motive, rhythm, harmony, or perhaps a mood come to mind first? My name is Mark Taratushkin, and today we're going to talk about Schubert's Piano Sonata in G major. The more we seek to grasp the essence of a piece, the greater the need to acquaint ourselves with the original text. From the moment a work is created to its publication, many changes can occur. An editor may wish to add a few shades and slurs or transpose the piece to an entirely different key. It's hard to believe, but this happened to Schubert as well. His Impromptu No. 3 from Opus 90 was once published in G major instead of G flat major. The publisher simply thought it would be easier for piano enthusiasts, since there's one accidental in the key signature instead of 6. In this sense, Schubert's Sonata Deutsch 894 was no exception. Let's take a look at the original title page and compare it with the first edition by Tobias Haslinger. The first thing that catches our eye is the title itself. Schubert named it Fourth Sonata for Piano Only. To this day, it remains a mystery what the composer meant by only. In the 18th century, it was common practice to publish one work in multiple arrangements. For instance, not just for a symphony orchestra, but also for piano duet, string quartet, and other ensembles. The transcriptions were often not done by the composers themselves, but by their assistants or publishing house staff. As a result, the quality of the arrangement would sometimes suffer. Beethoven, for example, complained to his publisher Breitkopf and Härtel in his letter. Let me quote here. This unnatural rage for transcribing pieces of music from the pianoforte to stringed instruments that in every respect are so utterly opposite should cease. And I confidently affirm that Mozart is the only composer whose music for pianoforte can be transferred to other instruments. And Haydn as well. And without wishing to rank myself with these two great men, I make the same assertion regarding my pianoforte sonatas. Because whole passages would have to be omitted or else altered, which would have to be supplied in another way. And here's the difficult stumbling block, that one must be either the master himself or possess his skill and inventive faculty. I've transcribed one of the sonatas myself for string instruments, but it was because I was often urgently requested to do so, and I'm quite certain that no one else could do it. Perhaps Schubert meant that his sonata should not be transcribed for other ensembles, thereby emphasizing the exclusively pianistic nature of the piece. Despite Schubert's intentions, his publisher, Tobias Haslinger, decided to release the work not as a sonata, but as a set of 4 individual pieces, renaming the first part Fantasy, Andante, Minuet, and Allegretto. It seems that being an experienced salesman, Haslinger anticipated the unpopularity of a large-scale work by a composer who was not yet well known at the time, and decided that 4 distinct pieces would have a better chance of success with a broader audience. At the time of publication, the composer was 29 years old. He has been suffering from syphilis for many years, and the treatment was even more agonizing. Bloodletting sessions likely only worsened his conditions. His music was well known, but the composer had not yet achieved the widespread fame or financial stability. Schubert's pieces were whistled in the streets of Vienna and performed in taverns and saloons, often without realizing that the unassuming young man in glasses, a frequent visitor of brothels and pubs, was the author. The song genre remained far less prestigious compared to opera or symphony, and Schubert's larger works were often not taken seriously, being compared to the great Beethoven. The same fate befell the G major sonata. Critics found it too drawn out and monotonous. We know very well that Beethoven was Schubert's idol. In his letters, we find the most enthusiastic statements about Beethoven's works. And in conversations with Chabert, one of his friends, Schubert said that he did not even dream of equaling the great master. Apart from that, on his deathbed, Schubert asked to hear Beethoven's Quartet No. 14, Opus 131. Now in the context of Beethoven, let's return to our sonata and acquaint ourselves with its main theme. This very first chord undoubtedly evokes specific associations, namely the Beethoven Fourth Piano Concerto. Begins exactly the same way. Same chord, same tonality, the same third in the melody. Rhythmically, however, this theme is more reminiscent of another very well-known piece by Beethoven, his Seventh Symphony, trio from this symphony. Such borrowings are common practice among composers. We can speculate at length whether it was done consciously or not, but personally I think it's quite irrelevant. The soundscapes of these works are undoubtedly very different. Alfred Brendel, in his introduction to today's sonata, says something that I very much like. He says that Beethoven composes like an architect, while Schubert composes like a sleepwalker. I believe this is a very apt statement. Schubert's music in this sonata has more of an afterward character, some sort of an echo, a distant dream. There's a certain enlightened contemplation, tranquility, and absolute detachment from this world. Some signs of danceability appear only in the second theme. In the first theme, however, the movement comes to a halt. Think about it. How long does the first chord last? Maybe like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or maybe like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or maybe even longer. 1, maybe we shouldn't count. Although the composer precisely notates the rhythm, the long chords feel absolutely measureless and completely timeless. The music here comes to a standstill, and Schubert's universe of sound here is completely infinite. Composer Dieter Schnabel claims in his essay that primary impetus for Schubert's creation of the theme is a soundscape filled with the color of G major, from which all themes and motives grow. Schnabel's double orchestra fantasy is entirely based on the theme of our today's sonata and this idea of G major soundscape. Schnabel seems to continue Schumann's thought that Schubert's music possesses divine lengths. G major is everywhere, repeated numerous times, and reaffirmed in the cadence. Let's take a closer look at what comes next. After an extended number of measures, Schubert finally moves away from quiet serenity and introduces a B minor episode with a distant ostinato basis. Let's recall here the distant trills of the B flat major sonata. a sudden change in the landscape, a sort of slipping from one tonality to another, is generally characteristic of Schubert, when a new harmony occurs without any preparation. There's another example of it in the second movement. Third movement, where this comes. And so far and so forth, these examples are endless. It's interesting to talk here a little bit about the so-called moderator, a special switch on the contemporary instruments for Schubert, in a sense performing the function of the modern left pedal. Because here in the score we can see that Schubert marks this distant episode with a triple piano. To Schubert it always means to use moderator.
The piano has 3 pedals. Well, we're not calling them pedals because they don't have actual pedals, but it's knee levers. So the right knee lever is just like the right pedal in a modern piano. It lifts the dampers from the strings and gets them back down. Completely on the left is like the left pedal on the piano. It's a una corda, so it shifts the mechanic, and then you only strike 1 string instead of 2 strings. So if I play, but the difference is much bigger than on a modern piano. It's interesting because it's really just 1 string. And then in the middle, you have the so-called moderator. On some other forte pianos, you can actually action it with a little button. You have here a piece of white cloth, and when I press the pedal, it just pulls it back a little bit, and now it's stuck between the hammers and the strings. And when I without, and with. It's beautiful. There's so many pieces that end with double P and then triple P and then still diminuendo. And you're on a modern piano, you think, how am I ever gonna? Sorry. You can use the different pedaling options to make it softer and softer and softer, and it's very comfortable. It's very beautiful.
The second theme largely continues the imagery of G major. However, now it's a serene Ländler resonating somewhere in the distance. You know, like when we're still asleep and somewhere outside the window, either in reality or in a dream, it's unclear and it doesn't matter. Some known music starts playing. Especially those parts. I could talk endlessly about the dramaturgy of the first part, the first movement, the transformations that the themes undergo, but I think that once we understand the main thematic elements, you'll hear it all without me. So let's briefly return to the composer's manuscript, composer's draft. It seems that the original concept for the second movement of our sonata was completely different. We can judge this by the scores that Schubert sent to his publisher. This score has survived to this day, is digitized and stored in the archive of the London Library. I will leave a link to it in the description of this video. So, it seems that after the minuet was finished, the composer decided to rewrite the second movement and tore out the old version from the prepared scores, replacing it with the second movement we know today. However, the first and the last pages also served as the end of the first and the beginning of the third movements. Perhaps he was simply too lazy to rewrite the framing pages anew and decided to cross out the irrelevant parts. Thanks to this composer's laziness, or perhaps simply economy, after all, sheet music was still not the cheapest pleasure at the time, we know now how the second movement might have sounded. Allow me to play the preserved fragment to you. So this is the ending of the first theme. And here's the new material. We don't know what comes next. And as for the other side, here's the second part that survived. Come to the very last repeat of the main theme. This particular rhythm is quite characteristic of Schubert's music in general, but it didn't find its development in the second movement. However, it's prepared in the minuet and then pervades in the entire finale. Most likely, the composer simply decided to save it for later and dedicate the entire movement to this rhythm. Okay, let's recall here another Schubert sonata, Deutsch 840, the so-called Relique. I will play for you the first theme from the second movement. In my opinion, the similarity is obvious. This sonata was not completed by Schubert, and the theme was most likely just in the composer's drafts. He was looking for a possible use for it. Indeed, the theme is beautiful, but its use in the context of our second movement doesn't seem purposeful. The first two themes would not be contrasting enough in that case. Thus, the delicate C minor melody was replaced by a more dynamic orchestral episode. theme of the minuet in our sonata today also actively echoes the theme of the minuet from Relique. Let me illustrate. Here's the minuet from the 894. And here's the fragment from the minuet of Deutsch 840. I think it's quite possible that both sonatas were formed from themes previously collected by the composer, and he was simply looking for their possible use in one context or another. So the context of G major sonata turned out to be more suitable for using the thematic material from Relique, and the context of Relique for using the early sketch from 894. In addition to this, Schubert used the thematic material almost unchanged in the second theme of his trio Opus 100. Such a collecting of ideas is quite normal among composers, and the wide availability of these drafts greatly facilitates our task of deciphering the composer's intention. Thanks to Haslinger's efforts, this minuet became one of the most frequently performed works by Schubert in the 19th century, but it was mostly performed as an independent piece outside of the context of the sonata. Paul Badura-Škoda, in the booklet for the complete collection of Schubert recordings on historical instruments, also points out that Brahms apparently liked the trio theme very much, as he often quotes it in his works in Rhapsody Opus 79 and Trio Opus 8. But I find this similarity to be most probably just a coincidence, and perhaps a particularly tender feeling shared by both composers for the ascendant tonic fourth. For the finale of his sonata, Schubert chose the rondo form. The refrain theme is full of humor, irony, and quirky effects. In addition to its similarity to the draft of the second part, it rhythmically somewhat remotely resembles the theme of the main part of another sonata, Deutsch 850. However, the character is quite different. It seems to spin in place, periodically grumbling and mocking itself. On Schubert's instrument, it was of course much more convenient to play this repeating chords. The entire mechanism was significantly lighter and much more responsive. In general, Schubert's instruments deserve some special attention.
All right, so maybe let's take out the keys and see the action, and maybe let's speak a little bit about the action itself. What's so special about it?
So this is there's many names. Some people call it Prellzungenmechanik, but generally we just use Viennese action or Viennese forte piano. Although the originator of this action was actually Johann Andreas Stein, who was in Augsburg. Yeah, so what's amazing about this is, of course, its sheer simplicity and the fact that you have a lot of contacts between your finger and the hammer. There's only one turning point, so to speak, here, and you always stay in contact with the hammer, which is not the case in a modern mechanic, or even in an English mechanic from the time where the leverage is the other way around. But yeah, so it's incredibly fine, very simple. There's this thing here at the back called, this is the Prellzunge, or the Auslöser, the release. So once you press the key, after a certain point, it has to come back down. I mean, if I keep my finger here, it would go up, but it wouldn't come back down. but when I leave it, there's a little feather in the back that's
pushes the hammer back.
exactly. And then different as in a modern mechanic, you have to leave the key completely back down before you can strike it again. So if I try to repeat earlier, it hasn't what they call the Schnabel, this little piece of leather in the back, hasn't come back under the Auslösung, and you cannot strike the key again.
Which was not the case with the English mechanic, right?
No, actually also, but the English mechanic is a very different. It's called a Stoßmechanik. It's a push mechanic. So where it's much, the English mechanic is much more a sort of prototype of what becomes the modern piano. This has kind of died out. This is like our distant cousin. It's like the Neanderthal of pianos, if you want. So interestingly are the hammers, of course, which have two little layers of leather. Hard leather underneath, and then what they call intonation leather on the top, which you can change every few years to make it fine again. Because the turning point moves with the action, it means that actually the hammer is not striking the strings like this, but it's striking the strings a little bit like this. And that's interesting because later, when they adapt and use felt, it was a problem because the felt would be cut very quickly. And then they put leather on top of the felt. If you have a Bösendorfer, for example, from the mid-19th century, you have that. You have felt and then leather on top of it. So the thing is, with this mechanic, it's incredibly refined. It's very simple. It works really, really well, but it grows badly. So once you add more weight, more size, bigger keys, heavier, because the strings get longer, the tension gets more. With later instruments, they want more sound. And then you start to see a lot of imbalances up here, because then this moving rotation point becomes a little bit of a hazard. It's very, very difficult to fine-tune it, but as long as it's in this register and until let's say the 1820s, 1830s, this is an absolutely fantastic piece of mechanics, and it works really, really well. It gets you a very singing and speaking sound, which is perfect for the music of this time. Yeah.
What do we have here? Like, what's this? You said that this is the instrument that Schubert could possibly actually play.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is an original. We're 1825, 1830. It's not entirely clear. The builder is Josef Böhm, who was one of the many, many builders there was in Vienna, but one of the best.
Is it still the Viennese mechanic? Or
yeah, so actually mechanically, there's not a single difference between what we're seeing here and what we just saw before. It's the same action, except, well, the action is exactly the same. The hammers, everything is a little bit bigger. So the hammers are a bit bigger. Instead of 2 layers of leather on the hammers, there's now a few more. And of course, we see that there's a difference. There are pedals now. Originally, this instrument had 5 pedals, actually, but when it was restored about 20 years ago, they did it to the bare minimum because it was a school instrument, so to speak. But you could still see there's a hole here, and there used to be a drum and bells in the back. People loved military music, and you could have bells and jingles in your instrument. I don't know why Steinway hasn't picked up on that idea yet. And then there's the moderator, which we already knew, which is still the middle pedal, the Verschiebung or Una Corda pedal on the left, and then the right pedal is also the same.
And this instrument already has how many octaves?
So yeah, we've grown very quickly. Yeah? So what we saw before was this. What we have here is next to it, we have a Stein which has 5 octaves, so F to F. And so now we've grown, and so we can talk about it in terms of Beethoven sonatas. 2 notes, we have the Waldstein. 2 more notes, we have the Appassionata, and then here we're in the late sonatas. So we're 2 notes away from the modern piano.
How would you say is playing this instrument different from the previous one?
So already for a modern pianist, this feels much more like home than what we were looking at before. The keys have more weight, but yes, it's still a Viennese action, so it's still incredibly delicate and sensitive to your touch. You still have to remove the finger completely before you can repeat a note, and of course, the different registers all have very particular sounds, which is also what I think composers worked with a lot in their compositions.
So I see there are already 3 strings in most of the cases.
Yeah,
Like there we had like 3 only.
actually,
in the
yeah.
upper
So
registers,
this is 3 strings almost all the way through, except for a few notes in the bass. So there's much more tension on this instrument. We can also see it's much more sturdy, much more.
Was actually
solid.
this instrument transportable?
So that's of course a big minus to this whole development in heavier and heavier and bigger instruments is that they become much more difficult to transport. Yeah, this other instrument we could really easily carry it with 2. I can actually a Stein like this. You can any big car you can just shove it in yourself, so to speak. It's really easy. This is already much more heavy. Yeah.
And tuning this instrument, the pianist still had to do it himself, right?
Oh, it's
Like and even nowadays, like.
I mean,
if
a
you
lot of
play this
people who
particular
play
instrument-
historical instruments like to tune themselves. This is a lot of work.
like in comparison to the previous one.
Yeah, the other one I can do. It takes me, 45 minutes to an hour. Here it takes me half a day because I'm not used to it. Do you want to play?
I could.
Yeah,
Maybe
go
you
for it.
could?
I mean, as I said, this will seem much more familiar to you than what you had before. Have you noticed that they changed the color of the keys?
Yes, indeed.
So I don't know exactly what year it switches. I think it's also regionally different, but it had to do something with the price of the ivory, which apparently went down.
This is ivory.
So this is ivory. And it used to be so prohibitively expensive that they use it only for what are now the black keys. And then at some point it was turned around.
Okay, what I'm particularly curious about is this place. It's indeed much easier to control it.
Yeah, of course. The repetition, it's not easy because you have to go all the way back. But of course, the sound, you don't need much force to have a very precise and very lively sound.
What you can notice here is that some keys are a little bit deeper because of how many people stroked them before.
Well, if you look at the black keys, they're almost they lost a few millimeters on the sides.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Well, this is an instrument with a history.
And that's the moderator.
In the middle is the moderator, yes. Every register has its own color. And that also means for me that the questions with balance suddenly find an answer by themselves. Because sometimes you don't need to be super loud in the part that you want to have the melody in, or because it's really like different instruments playing at the same time. And there's a transparency to the sound, which makes it possible to be, especially in these late Schubert sonatas, which are for me basically like sketches to symphonies. You can really have a whole world come together on an instrument like this.
There's a great number of recordings of this sonata. Some of my favorites are Wilhelm Kempff, Grigory Sokolov, Alfred Brendel, Eduard Erdmann, Jörg Demus, Paul Badur Škoda on historical instruments, Konrad Graf, I think, Andreas Steyer on Hammerflügel. I will leave all the links in the description of this video, as well as the links to the most interesting literature about Schubert, in my opinion. And the next video on this channel will also feature my live recording from a concert at the Bielefelder Philharmonie. Of course, one can talk about this music endlessly, but talking about music is like dancing about architecture, isn't it? So, let's listen. Let me know in the comments which recordings you like the most and why. Perhaps I forgot something important. I'm not a musicologist after all. Write about that too. Like, share, subscribe, and see you in the next video.